Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on Egypt being a cornerstone for political stability and peace in the Arab world. This is in light of all the political developments taking place around the world at the moment. But before we start doing that, let's check out some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who is following up the executive status of the Olympic sports cities nationwide on Tuesday. Now, this came during the President's meeting with Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, Minister of Planning and Economy Hala Saeed, Minister of Finance Mohammed Maid, Minister of Youth and Sports Ashraf Subhi, and Head of the Financial Affairs Committee of the Armed Forces Ahmed al-Shazli. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi said President el-Sisi directed that the infrastructure facilities of the sports system are being implemented in accordance with global standards and specifications, as well as the comprehensive approach which is integrated with mega projects around the country. The head of state said those facilities would qualify Egypt to possess the capabilities with the specifications of international standards that allow the country to host major international championships in different games. This target can be achieved, especially with the integration of modern sports cities system in Egypt in terms of diversity and geographical locations, whether in the new administrative capital or in the north of the Mediterranean coast or the Cairo Stadium Authority in Cairo, in addition to its connection with the infrastructure of the new Axis networks, telecommunications, airports, hotels in Egypt. During the meeting, President el-Sisi reviewed the executive position of the city of the Olympic Games in Burj Al Arab and the geographic environment of the Cairo Institute and its sports facilities. And upon directives of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, an Egypt Air flight left for the Romanian capital on Tuesday to bring back Egyptian students who arrived from Ukraine. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi said the cabinet had coordinated with Egyptian embassies in concerned countries, as well as the ministries of Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian Expatriates Affairs and Civil Aviation to send the plane. And also, Minister of Immigration and Egyptian Expatriates Affairs Nabila Makram said daily communications are held with Egyptian students in crisis-hit Ukraine. The minister asserted that no deaths were reported among Egyptian nationals in the country, adding that the Egyptian man who was injured after breaking a curfew is now in stable condition at the intensive care unit. She said Hungary is providing access to refugees fleeing Ukraine on condition they have a valid passport and a stay permit. Makram added that Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Moldova are providing facilities including accommodation. According to the minister, Egyptians in Ukraine should commit to curfew regulations and urge students who are fleeing eastern and central Ukraine to stick to Egyptian embassy instructions. These were some of the stories making the news today, but now turning our attention regarding the Egyptian political diplomacy within the Arab region. Let's check out this report focusing on the Egyptian-Kuwaiti relations and this relation, the role it plays within the Arab world and the Gulf countries. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has stressed Egypt's keenness on the stability and security of Kuwait and all Gulf countries in the face of domestic and regional challenges. The security of these countries as being part of Egypt's own national security. This came during President el-Sisi's official visit to Kuwait, where he held talks with Kuwaiti Emir Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmad al-Jaber and Crown Prince of Kuwait Sheikh Mishal al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah at Bayan Palace in Kuwait, in the presence of delegations from the two countries. During the meeting, the Kuwaiti Emir hailed Egypt's role in enhancing Arab joint work in facing the current crises and challenges in the region and its efforts in preserving stability and advancing economic development. He also praised Egypt's support for Kuwait at all levels and contributions made by the Egyptian community in Kuwait. Furthermore, the Prince hailed the Egyptian community's contribution in construction and development processes in Kuwait in various fields. He praised the prominent Egyptian role in strengthening the mechanisms of joint Arab action to face the current regional crises, which he described as a model to be followed in maintaining stability and advancing economic development. For his part, President el-Sisi thanked the Emir for the warm reception and hospitality, asserting that Egyptian-Kuwaiti cooperation is a mainstay for achieving regional stability and a major pillar of Egyptian policy. The head of state emphasized Egypt's desire to strengthen and diversify the framework of bilateral cooperation and find ways to push the relationship to broader horizons in various political, security, economic, and commercial fields. Additionally, the two sides reviewed the existing efforts to combat terrorism and extremist ideology and spread a culture of tolerance and moderation at a regional level. In this context, it was emphasized the need to continue coordination to confront regional challenges and achieve the aspirations of its people.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us now over the phone to shed more light on the Egyptian diplomacy and the Egyptian-Kuwaiti relations and the role it plays within the regional stability. We're joined by Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the professor at the American University in Cairo and the expert on Arab affairs. Dr. Fahmy, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Dr. Fahmy, first of all, amid all the instability that's hitting many parts around the world now, we're taking a look at the Egyptian diplomacy and the role it played and is still playing in terms of maintaining some sort of security and stability within the Arab world. How would you rate it so far, the kind of work that's been done and still being done at the moment?
First of all, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I think the report that was shown reflects to a great extent the challenges that Egypt has to address right now with regard to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's a very delicate situation for a country like Egypt to try and calculate exactly its best stances and negotiate and discussions with the various actors, because there are a lot of things at stake here for Egypt. I mean, first of all, like you rightly mentioned, the issue of resistance in most countries and the surrounding countries. I think it's paramount importance for us to ensure that by not taking any clear-cut biases or sides in this conflict, that we the most important priority would be to maintain the well-being of Egyptian citizens. I think the steps that have been taken by the Egyptian government is commendable in that regard. Second of all,
Dr. Fahmy, I'm sorry, but can you please try and raise your voice a little bit?
Between the West and Russia, we need to have relations with both sets of countries. And it's really very important, again, at this moment in time, yet not easy, to be clearly biased or to take one side as opposed to the other. So it's a very challenging situation, but I think so far the steps and stances, the statements that have been made so far really reflect a great deal of wisdom and prudence with regard to the conflict.
Dr. Fahmy, I mean, we're going to be looking at the Egyptian-Kuwaiti relations. This is in light of President Sisi's visit that he made, a one-day visit quite recently to Kuwait, meeting the Kuwaiti Emir, the Kuwaiti Sheikh, and also the Prime Minister there as well. What have been the highlights of such a visit and the importance of this visit right now? Dr. Fahmy, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes.
So, Dr. Fahmy, if we're looking at the President's visit quite recently to Kuwait, it was a one-day visit where he met the Kuwaiti Emir, also the Prime Minister there. This was dubbed as one of the most important visits and critical visits taking place at this point in time. What is the significance of it, and how is it prepping and consolidating the stability and peace within the Arab region at this time?
Well, I think on many levels, this is a very important step, again, to solidify inter-Arab relations. For several reasons. I mean, first of all, a few weeks ago, there was a meeting that was held in Cairo for the ministers of oil and petroleum and natural gas and the OPEC and the OPEC organizations. And Egypt did play a main role in this process. You know, we're talking about the COP22 being organized in Egypt later in the year. We're talking about sustainable development and the gradual shift towards renewable sources of energy, and at the same time, this is on the medium and long term, but also on the short term, we have the challenge of these ongoing conflicts, regional and global, which also affect oil prices and other sources of fossil fuels. So I think it's important right now for there to be a well-coordinated Arab stance based on agreements and discussions from within the Arab world. I think these continuous discussions with important countries like Kuwait, like the GCC, all lead, go in this direction.
Well, sir, do you think that this visit was had more of a political goal to achieve or an economic one? I mean, if we're looking at some of the political goals, they were talking about extremism, they were talking about terrorism, they were talking also, they discussed the Houthi militia and the situation with Yemen. What sort of developments do you think will take place in that file?
I think, both issues or both sectors are really very much interlinked. We cannot possibly discuss or think about the political issues without also having an eye on the economic sector and vice versa. So, all of these issues you mentioned are critical issues. These are issues that definitely, Egypt has a clear stance on terrorism, for instance, and it is having its own battle with border security, with different groups of radical Islam and so forth. And the same also for a country like Kuwait, which was for a while perceived as maybe more of a neutral or taking a mid-ground between the main camps in the Arab region, Qatar on the one hand, and Saudi Arabia on the other. Now that there's reconciliation between these camps, it's important again for countries like Kuwait to regain their role. Egypt has had very strong and long relations with Kuwait. And also historical, since the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the support Egypt has shown to Kuwait, and then Kuwait also to Egypt in the aftermath of the uprising here. So, there's a long set of ties between the two countries, and it's really important, if Kuwait is playing a vital role, like it is like the Houthis and radical Islam and terrorism and so forth, that would definitely be a benefit, a big gain if Kuwait is also to play an active role in these files, and hopefully so in the coming period.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Fahmy, do you think also that Kuwait might have, or the GCC in general, could have some sort of a role to play or some sort of an influence to have on the situation in Ethiopia with regards to the Grand Ethiopian Dam?
Well, I mean, hopefully, the GCC countries, some of them do have investments actually in sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa and in Ethiopia, specifically. So I think it's recently Ethiopia has actually started officially announced the beginning of the generation of electric power from the dam. So I think this is an issue that Egypt knows very well. That it's an evident source of threat to peace and security. So it's always important to mobilize support from within our neighbors and friends in that regard. So I think it's only sensible for Egypt to expect from the countries of the GCC to be supportive in that regard. And as today we're seeing, again, we always refer to the Russian-Ukrainian, maybe the item, the main item on the news today. But today we see the impact of sanctions, economic sanctions, and to what extent they can affect the stability of a country today. So there's a lot to be done with regard to economic ties, investment, business relations, all of these sectors, I think. And again, we expect hopefully more support from GCC countries in that regard, because there's still a lot that can be done. And hopefully visits as such will help actualize that.
Mm-hmm. Well, sir, I mean, if you're talking about economic cooperation and trade cooperation between both countries, I mean, we've seen the quite recent economic effects that's been taking over the whole world, especially regarding the soaring prices of oil. Now, do you feel that during such a visit to Kuwait and a relationship between Egypt and the GCC countries as well, can we somehow soften any sort of harsh impact on the prices of oil? So in return, Egypt and the rest of the Arab world wouldn't be affected way too much by the soaring prices?
I mean, quite possible. That's a possibility, of course. As a matter of fact, it's probable that such a show of support from a country like Kuwait and other GCC countries would definitely play a role. No one knows as of yet if the conflict in Eastern Europe will turn into a protracted conflict or if it will be a short-lived one. So far, it's not quite clear, but the indicators really show that it's, at least for the coming months, that the prices of oil and gas are going to be on the rise. So, yeah, we've seen that in the past, that Egypt has received in the past different forms of preferential terms of agreements when it comes to oil, sometimes even direct, maybe shipments also of oil. To an extent, this will definitely help, maybe on the short term, but medium and long term, of course, this is a global crisis that the whole world has to deal with. So, yeah, I mean, maybe short and relatively medium term, such negotiations can help maybe remove some of the direct impact of this increase in the prices of oil.
Well, Egypt has been really shifting a lot of its attention to the energy sector, talking about natural gas, especially the Zohr gas field, talking about renewable energy, solar energy, the electricity, the electrical power plants, the biggest in the world. Do you feel that all that work has been prepping us for times like these? So in a way, we could be in a good position in terms of energy, gas, fuel, electricity, and renewable and green energy for the time being?
To an extent. I mean, right now is a net exporter of natural gas, which is a very positive development. Again, as you mentioned, due to the most recent discoveries in the Mediterranean, which are also likely to increase in the coming period. So, that's a positive. That means that on maybe the medium term, again, Egypt is well positioned to depend more on natural gas. As you know, of course, this sort of transformation also requires time. That you need to also adjust or readjust the infrastructure, allows for more dependency on natural gas rather than oil. This is happening already, and it has started. But still, oil, of course, is fossil fuel, but a lot of industries and the vehicles, still transportation still depend on oil mostly. The prospects or the medium and long-term planning or vision of Egypt does depend or does pay a lot of attention to sustainable sources of energy and to moving gradually from fossil fuels. But on the immediate run, oil is still the main or one of the main sources of energy in the country. I think what's happening now maybe is an important reminder that we and other countries also need to maybe expedite or enhance the process of readjustment and shift from the dependency on oil to natural gas and then eventually to renewable and permanent clean sources of energy, which, again, Egypt does have one of the biggest reservoirs, really, of renewable energy in the world in terms of solar energy and wind also.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fahmy, since 1961, Egypt and Kuwait signed about 105 cooperation agreements, and in 2020 alone it stood at $364 million, the trade between both countries. Now, what sort of prospects do you feel? You were talking about economic cooperation and investment between both countries. What sort of projects or sectors that would benefit more from cooperation between Egypt and Kuwait? A lot of people, a lot of experts have been talking about water desalination projects, especially with the critical situation with the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
Yeah, the Gulf countries, all of them, they have a lot of expertise and history in the field of water desalination. We know that. So, of course, here Egypt has, with or without the dam, really Egypt had to or has to depend on different sources of water because of the scarcity and the increase in population in the country and the limited amount of the non-water anyway. So, desalination, of course, that's a major area of investment and potential cooperation between the two countries. But also Egypt is currently also embarking on building a very, massive set of projects and plots of land, whether by the Suez Canal or by the new Port Said port or in all the new communities that are currently being established throughout the country, the new capital also. I think it's important here also for us to encourage countries like Kuwait and other countries to invest more or to diversify their investment more. I think for the most part, a lot of the Gulf countries, Kuwait, definitely the UAE, have been investing a lot in the real estate sector, and I think this, on its own is insufficient. We really need to capitalize on these opportunities and try to also diversify the basket of investment from these countries in different fields, because there are opportunities here for the Gulf countries and for all investment really from all over the world. But I think it makes sense for the investment coming from the GCC to benefit from this help and from all these new projects and all new areas that are being built, and also for Egypt to benefit from the fact that there is a lot of cultural and historical and social relations with these countries. So it's a win-win situation. And I'm hopeful also that in the coming period we'll see more diversification in the investment coming from the GCC countries and countries like Kuwait.
Dr. Fahmy, now with all the political developments taking place around the world, a lot of people are also trying to get some attention to what's been happening in countries such as Syria and Libya and Iraq, and also, of course, the Palestinian issue, where a lot has been going on, not for weeks or months or years, but for decades taking place there. Do you feel that maybe now is a time for the international community as well to really understand the gravity of what's happening in different areas around the Arab world and maybe focus some attention there, or maybe even sooner rather than later?
Well, at this juncture, it's very difficult for us to expect the rest of the world, I mean, especially Europe and the US, to look beyond the conflict between Russia and Ukraine because of the graveness and the immediate nature of the conflict, and also the ramifications. All of them, of course, we can spend hours talking about what's at stake in this conflict. But I think the challenge here is that we've seen that in the past a lot, that whenever there's such a global conflict that attracts the attention of the biggest powers or most of the world, it is seen as an opportunity by other regional or local actors to try and change the rules of the game or to win some grounds while such major issues are taking place. So I think the first call, to arms from this region, that there needs to be a lot of attention to, groups or countries or forces trying to capitalize on and win or benefit or gains in internal and local conflicts as well. That's correct.
Well, do you think, Dr. Fahmy, that as you've mentioned, if all the attention and focus is taking place in Europe right now, do you think that maybe some other countries or parties would make gains or take strides in regional crises in North Africa and the Middle East?
Exactly, yeah, that's what I was just saying, yeah, that other forces may think that this is an opportune moment to capitalize on, and again, there's a wide array of possibilities. You mentioned North Africa, again, the threat of rogue groups or militants are still there in countries like Libya, for instance, and in parts of the Sahara. We have in the Gulf, of course, the Houthis mentioned. We have the conflict also going on in Iraq between the different forces. We have the conflict, again, along the Persian Gulf with Iran. And, of course, we have the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Palestinian dilemma. So these are some of the major files that are still quite hot, and that different forces and countries can, capitalize on and try and gain some points while the world is turning another eye or not really looking or looking away. So it's important really for us to take note of that and try as much as possible to be vigilant and not to allow such, gains to be won, especially if it's at the expense of the interests of Egypt and its friends and allies.
Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the professor at AUC and the expert in Arab affairs, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not just Egypt and Kuwait and the GCC countries and other African states as well, but also the relationship between Egypt and Jordan has been really high on the agenda of the Egyptian diplomacy. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Jordan's King Abdullah II bin al-Hussein exchanged on Sunday views regarding the latest developments in regional and international issues of common interest. President al-Sisi received a phone call from the Jordanian monarch who touched on a number of issues pertinent to bilateral cooperation across various sectors. The two leaders also exchanged views on regional and international developments of common interest. King Abdullah II expressed he holds in high regard the special and close relations that Egypt and Jordan share in light of the constant coordination between the leaderships of the two countries. He looked forward to advancing bilateral cooperation frameworks at all levels and lauded the convening of the joint Egyptian-Jordanian Higher Committee recently in Cairo, chaired by the prime ministers of the two countries. For his part, President al-Sisi lauded the continuous development of relations between the two nations, as well as coordination on various regional and international issues. The president stressed the importance of continuing efforts to expand and deepen various areas of cooperation so as to maximize the common interests of both countries, noting the positive results of the recent joint Higher Committee meetings between the two sides.
Egypt opens up to the world. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets with world leaders.
أعبر لكم عن خالص الشكر والتقدير على حفاوة الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة.
Reaffirming Egypt's vision, delivering our voice abroad.
وتطوير التعاون الثنائي الاقتصادي والعسكري إلى مستويات غير مسبوقة.
Discussing regional and international developments. Solid and strong relations on the path of partnership and development.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us now over the phone to shed more light on tonight's issue, we're joined by Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Ambassador Bayoumi, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. Good evening. Ambassador Bayoumi, Egypt and Jordan has been really high on the agenda over the past few years, and the relationship between President al-Sisi and King Abdullah II, King of Jordan, has been quite a strong and brotherly relationship between both leaders. Can you please shed light on the importance and the role, the political role and influence Jordan has to play within the Arab region?
Of course, because as you well know, that Egypt and Jordan are the initiator of the peace process in the Middle East. And when most of the Arab countries were against this Sadat peace initiative, Jordan stayed very near to us. And then it is the second Arab country who signed a peace treaty with Israel. So both of us are among very few Arab countries who can use their influence to keep peace and stability in the area. Mm-hmm. Mind you that Egypt succeeded recently to stop the fight between Hamas and Israel. So the consultation between the two countries in the political and security matters is continuing, of course. I want to remind our audience that late in the 80s, we established a very important alliance between Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Yemen. Mm-hmm. And because of the Saddam Hussein invasion to Kuwait, this has been stopped. Now we are trying again and again to come back with this very effective group to revive these efforts. We have many economic and personal relations with Jordan. We have a very important Egyptian community working for Jordan. We have the Arab League Free Trade Area combine us together to free our trade. Then we have a long history concerning the negotiations with the European Union to sign the association agreement between Egypt and the European Union, also between Jordan and European Union. We have a treaty also, which is not very well known, which is Agadir Group. It is Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco. Those 4 countries of the Arab Mediterranean countries who signed previously an agreement with the European Union, and now we are freeing, or we already have freed the trade relations between those 4 countries. So many dimensions of the economic field which combine us with this small group, but Jordan really, you will realize that they are very near to us. We have border together, and many projects are in our mind in order to deepening and widening our relations in the economic field.
Well, the economic cooperation between Egypt and Jordan, as you've mentioned, is vast. But what are the already existing, what is the existing nature of this cooperation and the prospects of it? Because everything is changing within the economic world. If we're talking about energy, if we're talking about information, communication technology, if we're talking about even the political and touristic nature of cooperation is changing. What are the prospects for such a cooperation between Egypt and Jordan?
We are talking here exactly to what you mentioned, a very ambitious project, which is calling that Egypt will be the center in the whole area for trade in energy, whether it is oil or gas or the electric field also. We are connecting the electric net between the all Arab countries, from Baghdad in the far east of the Arab world up till Casablanca in the far west. Then we are also combining our electricity net to Jordan, then to Beirut. Very few people know that Beirut now is getting its electricity from Cairo. And also we shall export the surplus of our electricity and gas to Europe, and we shall import gas and liquidate it, and then it's sort of very important value add to this project, to this product. So this is one very important project concerning the energy. And transport also, we are keen to go to the Asian Arab countries through Jordan, because if you look, when you stay in your hotel in Taba, you will see immediately the Saudi border and the Jordanian border, and we are ambitious here to establish a sort of a bridge or a land way in order to make our life easier in the communication and in the transport also in this part of our countries.
Ambassador Bayoumi, another country that's been quite active on the political scene quite recently has been Algeria, where we saw the Algerian President Tebboune meeting with President Sisi, and also he went to Kuwait to meet the Kuwaiti Emir during the time when President Sisi was visiting Kuwait. How do you explain the political activity of Algeria within the Arab world and the strengthening of the bilateral relations between Egypt and Algeria in the recent times?
Algeria is very dear to us. We paid a lot because of our support to Algeria during the 60s. And I have a lot of Algerian friends. The Algerian ambassador in Cairo 5-6 years ago, he graduated from Cairo University, by the way. And the relation is very strong and very important. But damn to the football, which makes some problems because of the football fanatic people. But I have students in the Cairo University coming from Algeria, and they don't miss any occasion. They call me. They are still keen to see that Egypt is okay, that we are in good relations all the time. One friend, Algerian ambassador, he said, we were raised, we didn't know any newspaper except Al-Ahram, or any magazine except Al-Musawwar, or listening to Kulthum, Abdul Wahab, and the Egyptian singers. So it is a sort of very strong relations, and it's still continuing. I want to remind you with something to prove this. The first visit our President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi made after he was elected, he went to Algeria to bid consultation with Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the late Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the President of Algeria. It was our President's first trip out of Egypt. So this shows you how the relations are very important and very strong. Lately, we have strong consultation with Algeria concerning many things, whether in the Arab world, for Libya, for instance, for Yemen. Now I think the consultation and the meetings between the two sides is very strong.
Mm-hmm. What about the influence in Ethiopia? Can Algeria have some sort of an influence regarding the dam?
There is a small piece of news that Algeria, with Ethiopia and Nigeria and South Africa, started to establish a small group of consultation concerning Africa. Some people are not happy that Egypt is not within this group. Mm-hmm. This, in our diplomatic life, is very normal. We have an Arab League of 22 countries, but we have the Gulf countries, they have their subcontinent and sub-regional organization. We have Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. We have Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia, and Algeria. It's normal in our diplomatic and economic life to see this. So I am confident that if Algeria is a member of such a group, you can consider it easily as if Egypt is present, because Algeria will present our case as if it is an Algerian case, because after all it is a part of the Arab security matters.
Yes. Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard our guests over the phone, there are a lot of developments taking place not only in Europe but also the Arab region, and Egypt has been quite delicately and peacefully using its diplomatic prowess to maintain some sort of reasonable security and stability within Egypt and North Africa and the Middle East and maybe even the African continent as a whole. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, let me remind you to stay tuned on Nile TV International to follow up all the latest developments taking place minute by minute. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.